Imagine surviving a mission that was supposed to be impossible, only to discover that surviving it may have made you the target. That's exactly where Lioness Season 3, Episode 2 begins. The title is No Sorrow Like the Survivor, and that title tells us something important before the story even gets moving. In this world, survival isn't necessarily a happy ending. Sometimes the people who survive are the ones forced to carry everything that happened. And after the chaos of the Season 3 premiere, that's exactly the problem facing Jo, Caitlyn, and the entire Lioness operation. To understand Episode 2, we have to remember what happened in the Season 3 premiere. The episode introduced a completely different kind of threat. Jo McNamara and her team were pulled into a covert operation connected to Ukraine and Russian intelligence. Their mission was already dangerous, but the real problem came afterward. Jo returned home believing she had survived the operation. Then everything changed. The people who were supposed to represent safety became part of the threat. Jo was attacked outside her own home. She fought back. She survived. But in the process, she realized something terrifying. Her cover had been compromised. And that's where Season 3's central question begins. Who knew where Jo was? Because finding a highly trained CIA operative in a war zone is one thing. Finding her at home is something completely different. That suggests information has traveled. And if information has traveled that far, someone may have access to the machinery surrounding the operation. That's what makes the opening of Season 3 so disturbing. The enemy isn't necessarily standing across a battlefield. The enemy may already be inside the system. Episode 2 doesn't simply reset the story after the premiere. Instead, it begins dealing with the consequences. The official synopsis puts Caitlyn Mead at the center of the crisis. She is racing to contain the situation that is now spreading across multiple agencies, while Neil is struggling to deal with growing fear at home. And that tells us something very important. The problem is getting bigger. This is no longer just Jo's problem. It's no longer just a Lioness problem. It's becoming an institutional problem. And when a covert operation starts crossing the boundaries between agencies, intelligence networks, and domestic life, that's when people start asking dangerous questions. Who leaked the information? Who is compromised? Who can still be trusted? And perhaps most importantly. But before anyone can answer those questions, Caitlyn has to do something even more difficult. She has to stop the panic. Caitlyn Mead has always operated from a position of control. That's one of the defining characteristics of her character. Jo goes into the field, Caitlyn manages the larger chessboard. She makes decisions that Jo doesn't always see. She deals with politicians, agencies, intelligence officials, and consequences. But Episode 2 puts Caitlyn in a very different position. For perhaps the first time this season, the crisis is moving faster than the bureaucracy can contain it. And that's a nightmare for someone like Caitlyn. Because intelligence operations depend on information. Information has to move carefully. It has to be controlled. It has to reach the right person and nobody else. But once that information starts leaking into places it shouldn't, the entire system becomes vulnerable. This is where Lioness becomes more interesting than a simple military thriller. The show isn't only asking who can shoot better, it's asking who knows what. Think about it. A weapon can kill one person. Information can destroy an entire operation. If someone knows the identity of an operative, the location of an asset, the timing of a mission, or the connection between two intelligence operations, that knowledge can be turned into a weapon. And that's exactly why Jo's situation is so frightening. Her enemy doesn't necessarily need to defeat her in combat. They just need to know where she will be. That's a much more dangerous game. And this brings us back to the episode title, No Sorrow Like the Survivor. At first, it sounds like a statement about soldiers, but it can also describe the intelligence world. The people who survive are the people who know what happened. They know what was lost. They know what mistakes were made. And sometimes, they know things that other people desperately want buried. That's why survivors can become dangerous. Not because they're weak, because they remember. And Jo remembers. While Caitlyn is dealing with the institutional crisis, the story also gives attention to Neil and the fear spreading around the home front. That contrast is extremely important, because Jo's life has always been divided into two worlds. There is the operational world, and there is home. Normally, Jo can keep those worlds separated, but Season 3 is deliberately destroying that separation. The threat has followed her home, and now Neil is forced to confront a reality he may never have wanted to understand. Jo's job isn't simply dangerous when she's overseas. The danger can follow her through the front door. It can reach her family. It can change the way they sleep. It can change the way they look at strangers. And it can make ordinary life feel like a trap. This is why the emotional side of Episode 2 matters. The show is essentially asking, what happens when the person protecting everyone else can no longer protect her own home? And the answer isn't comforting. As Caitlyn works to contain the crisis, the investigation begins pointing towards something larger. The mission may have produced information that someone didn't want the CIA to uncover, and that raises the possibility that the team wasn't simply dealing with an isolated attack. There may be a pattern: names disappearing, information moving strangely, connections appearing where they shouldn't. The Season 3 premise has already teased this larger mystery. Jo is confronted by unseen forces, while patterns and missing information begin pointing towards enemies operating from the shadows. And now Episode 2 starts pulling those threads tighter. But what happens next changes everything, because the question isn't simply whether there is a breach. The question is how deep the breach goes. Now the real danger begins to emerge. The problem isn't just the attack on Jo, it's the information behind it. Someone knew enough to find her, which means the enemy may have access to sensitive intelligence. And if that information was leaked from inside the system, Jo and Caitlyn have a much bigger problem on their hands. The Ukraine mission suddenly looks different. What if the target wasn't simply a target? What if the entire operation was designed to expose the people hunting them? That possibility changes everything. Caitlyn now has to figure out exactly how deep the breach goes before sending anyone else into danger. Because if the wrong information reaches the wrong person, another operation could be compromised before it even begins. And Jo faces an equally dangerous problem. She has always trusted the mission, but now she has to question the information behind it. Who can she trust? Who has been compromised? And who is secretly working against them? That's what makes this part so tense. The enemy doesn't need to attack from the outside. They only need to manipulate the system from within. And once trust disappears, everyone becomes a potential threat. But the biggest question remains unanswered. Who knew where Jo would be? Because whoever had that information may know far more about the Lioness operation than anyone realizes. By the end of Episode 2, one thing becomes clear. The mission may be over, but the danger is only getting worse. Caitlyn is fighting to contain the growing crisis, while Jo is left dealing with the consequences of everything that happened. And that's the real meaning behind the episode's title: No Sorrow Like the Survivor. Survival isn't always a victory. Jo made it home, but she can't simply leave the mission behind. The fear, the memories, and the unanswered questions follow her. Even worse, the enemy may still be hiding inside the system. Who leaked the information? Who can Jo trust? And how far has the breach already spread? Those questions set up the next chapter of Lioness perfectly, because in this world, the battlefield isn't always somewhere overseas. Sometimes it's waiting at home. And when you no longer know who is watching you, there may be nowhere safe to hide.